I want to take you through a little bit of recent church history showing some of the restoration that we have been through, what God has been doing to get the church back to the original condition that's laid out in the book of Acts and in the epistles. If you just go back just 100 years, just go back 100 years in your mindset and begin to look at what the church looked like 100 years ago. How many of those five ministry graces were actively active within the church? We did not see apostles 100 years ago. We did not see prophets 100 years ago. We did not see evangelists 100 years ago. And we did not see teachers 100 years ago. The only thing that we saw was a pastor. Everybody, if you were in the ministry, you were a pastor. That was the only function you could fulfill. And then we ended up with a lot of people that weren't graced to be pastors, functioning as pastors. I don't know how many people I'd seen through the years that were gifted to be evangelists, anointed to be evangelists, and they had to become a pastor just so that they could be accepted. How terrible is that? And so, as we look at the restorations that God has done, even 100 years ago, we had a one-man show. We had pastor only. So God began to answer the prayers of his people and begin works of restoration. So if you go through some of church history, even in the 20th century, okay, even in the 20th century, we had a move of God that was known as the Voice of Healing Revival. The Voice of Healing Revival was in the late 40s into the mid 50s. And in the late 40s to the mid 50s, we saw that God restored the office or the ministry gift, the ascension gift of the evangelist in the Voice of Healing Revival. We saw people like A. Allen, Oral Roberts, William Branham, Jack Coe, W.V. Grant Sr., and so forth and so on. And many of us are familiar with these ministries. Until the late 40s into the mid 50s, we did not see evangelists functioning within the body of Christ. We saw pastors functioning. And we know that according to Ephesians 4, it takes all five of the ascension gifts to fully equip the body. And if we've only got pastors, we are functioning at 1/5 or 20% efficiency. Therefore, we are 4/5 short. So God began the work of restoration by restoring the evangelist to the church. And then we came into the 1970s, and another work of restoration began to be made manifest within the church, and that was known as the Word of Faith movement. I like to call it the WOF, W-O-F, the Word of Faith movement. And in the Word of Faith movement, we saw people like Kenneth Hagin, Kenneth Copeland, Charles Capps, Fred Price, Marilyn Hickey, so forth and so on. And with the Word of Faith movement, we saw the ascension gift or the ministry gift of the teacher restored to the church. So now we had pastors that we always had. And now we've added through the Voice of Healing, the evangelist, and through the Word of Faith movement, the teacher. Now we are up to 3/5. We are at 60% efficiency at 3/5, having three of the five gifts of the ascended Christ operational within the church. But we're still missing 2/5 or 40%. We are missing the prophet and the apostle. In the late 80s into the mid 90s, we saw what was known as the prophetic movement. And with the prophetic movement, we saw the ministry gift, the office, or the function of the prophet get restored to the church. And we saw the rise of people like Bishop Bill Hammond and Chuck Pierce and James Gall and Cindy Jacobs and Kim Clement and many others like that. And they came on the scene, and we saw the prophet restored to the church. Up until that time, prophets were not welcomed nor accepted within the church. So we came from a period where only pastors were accepted to now we've got pastors accepted, evangelists accepted, teachers accepted, and now finally prophets are accepted. So we are up to 4/5 or 80% efficiency, but we're still missing the post-ascension apostles. Let me just say this, there is a difference between the apostles of the Lamb and post-ascension apostles. They are different classification of apostles. There will be no more apostles of the Lamb, but there can be post-ascension apostles, gifts that the head of the church gives to the church. The Greek word is doma, D-O-M-A, and it literally means a present. So Jesus gave presents to the church. He gave doma to the church, namely apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. So therefore, in the kingdom, every day is Christmas, because Jesus gave gifts. And copying an old expression that we've used, colloquial slang in America, God is not an Indian giver. He doesn't give and take away. Jesus gave gifts, and he never stopped giving them. He's still giving all 5 ministry graces, probably the 2000s, and we saw what we have termed or looked at as being an apostolic reformation. And in the apostolic reformation, we saw the gift of the apostle restored to the church. And we saw people like C. Peter Wagner, Che Ahn, John Kelly, Jonas Clark, and others like that. We saw that particular grace restored to the church. And so we saw the evangelist in the voice of healing. We saw the teacher in the word of faith movement. We saw the prophet in the prophetic movement. We saw the apostle in the apostolic restoration, and the pastor, which never left. We always had the pastor. Even 100 years ago, the church only accepted and recognized the pastor.